Hello, everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez, and I'm the program coordinator with the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. And I'm going to welcome you today to our webinar titled Using Data to Inform Prevention Planning, featuring Dr. Karen Moses. Before we get started with today's session, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to share. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions today at any time for our presenter, but we do ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, and we ask that you use the chat to, introduce yourself, share where you're joining us from, and share resources and reflections on today's content. But again, please utilize the Q&A feature for those specific questions for our presenter today. We do have live captioning enabled for today's session, and you can turn that on through the bottom dashboard. If you have any issues setting that up, please send me a message and I'll be happy to walk you through that process. We also encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. We're also excited to share quite a few upcoming events that we have. Launching next week, we have our Harm Reduction Revisited Learning Collaborative, and that will be taking place on April 19th from 1:30 to 2:30. And that first session is titled From Stigma to Safety, the Evolving Landscape of Harm Reduction and its Intersections with Social Justice, Prevention, and Campus Health Initiatives. And the presenters will be Ahmed Hosni and Dr. Kelsey Schmall. We also have an upcoming water cooler chat happening in May on May 9th from 2 to 3 o'clock, and is titled The AOD Prevention and Mental Health Connection, and will be facilitated and moderated by Dr. Dolores Chimiti. Our next webinar is happening May 17th from 2 to 3 o'clock and is titled Social Norms Marketing Campaigns, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and is featuring Dr. Bill DeYoung. And finally, we have our 2023 national meeting taking place at the end of June on June 25th through the 28th in Columbus, Ohio. And there will also be a virtual option that is available, and you can learn more by visiting the conference website. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you today our presenter, Dr. Karen Moses. Dr. Moses is the Director of Wellness and Health Promotion at Arizona State University. And it is always a pleasure getting the chance to learn from you, Dr. Moses, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time. It does look like you're muted still.
And thank you for that reminder. Thank you, Anthony. And I will share my screen here. This always takes me just a little bit of a minute. Let's see which screen I want to share. Okay. And I'm just hopefully going to be able to page through these first few that were already covered. Thank you. All right, now we'll get started. And Anthony, I just want to double check with you that my screen is showing as it should be.
It looks great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And here we go. All right, so hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. And welcome to this session on using data for prevention planning. There are many reasons that motivate prevention professionals like ourselves to collect data, and I want to begin by telling you my data story. A long time ago, I was a new college health professional. I had just graduated with my master's degree and was responsible for leading the health promotion and prevention section of the health center at my institution, which was Arizona State University. And still is. Our section's role was to provide education on a variety of health topics using a variety of modalities, which included peer education, sessions in classrooms, awareness events, and one-on-one sessions in our office, etc. And one thing that stood out to me was the lack of data for decision-making within the department about what we would be doing. And there were many unknowns about whether our efforts were making a difference. And just so you know, this was a long time ago, and it was sort of the dark ages for data. in college health promotion. There were some big data surveys starting to get up and running, like the core survey. But for example, the NCHA, Healthy Minds, and other surveys that we use today were not developed yet. So decisions on what to focus on and how to deliver health messages looked something like this. Just give you a second. It would appear, Hopkins, that your gut feel was only indigestion. So a staff member who had an interest in eating disorders would develop an awareness and education program about eating disorders, or whatever was the topic of the day that they were most committed to. Their gut or their interest would point a direction, and we would head that way. That is, until we started collecting health behavior data and having evidence of where we would spend our time and who was most affected. And our planning changed to something like this. So here we have a couple of men doing some planning. They look like old schoolers, and a younger person with a laptop saying, when you two have finished arguing your opinions, I actually have data. And this was the beginning of a time, actually it was before laptops even then, but it was the beginning of a time when our profession in college health and in prevention through colleges and universities, when we started really paying attention to data, we started developing more surveys, developing our own surveys on our campuses, and it really has grown and evolved over the past 25 years. So for today, I want to cover a few really important areas of doing your planning with data. And that includes some information about how to prepare for a survey, how to make sense of the data, why you might disaggregate the data and what that looks like, and then telling the student's story through data, really using the data to develop a story that can help people picture what's going on with your students. And then some, sort of final thoughts about using data. So here we go. First slide gets us into it, preparing for the survey. So you're going to start when you're getting ready to collect information with your goals. That should be no surprise to any of us who work in health promotion and prevention that we need goals. And that is true even when you're just putting together or selecting a survey. So common goals are listed here, and I'll just read off some of them that I think, well, all of these I think are important. You might have some of your own, but one goal is certainly just to learn about student health and well-being, like what's going on with our students. Do they really look like the students nationally? Every institution has a different mix of student demographics and influencers of their student body. And so we look a little different from campus to campus. You might just want to be answering questions that you have about your students. Like, I wonder what is happening with them about alcohol use. Gee, I wonder where they're using alcohol most. I wonder why they're using it, something along those lines. You might want to be monitoring trends, what's happening from year to year, or even as many of us have started using the wishes survey out of the a new group, is to actually start to look at data from month to month or semester to semester. I like to use data to influence commitment, to help our potential partners to see why they might want to partner with us to make changes for their students. You might be doing a social norms campaign or thinking of doing a social norms campaign. And I see that Dr. DeYoung is going to be giving a session on that in a few weeks. So you're going to have to collect data, the data that you're going to be announcing is going to have to be in your survey. You might be doing some media campaigns or be using data in your educational sessions or awareness activities. I like to really focus in on reducing well-being equity gaps. So really disaggregating the data and seeing which groups of students are the ones who need us to be paying attention to them, providing supports for them to help them thrive, and to reduce misuse among various student populations. And that may mean that you need to add some demographic information to your surveys, because maybe the national surveys, assuming that you're using those, might not have all of the engagement opportunities that your students are involved in. And there may be ways to subdivide your students into activities that will be easy for you to approach and change behaviors through activities that are already formally structured at your institution. We like to evaluate initiatives, use our data to set priorities for our university, and then really one of the best reasons for surveying students and for utilizing these resources is to focus your efforts to get the best use out of your limited resources. So when you're selecting a survey, again, you start with your goals, and then you need to decide what survey methodology you're going to use and what survey you're going to use. So you're going to think through, like, will you use a national or regionally developed survey or something homegrown? A national survey can provide a national group for you to reference and compare your students with. And that makes, sometimes the national survey will make administration simpler in many ways. They've already done the thought work and the work of putting the survey up into maybe an online or a paper format, depending on what you want to use. And they can provide support throughout the surveying process and help coach you on what to do and how to do it, etc. The flip of that is a homegrown survey, one that you develop at your university, perhaps with a group of faculty and administrators and staff and students who are interested in making sure that we ask the right questions. This can provide you with the information you need without as much perhaps overhead, and might provide you with a smaller set of questions to ask. Those are some of the pros of doing a homegrown survey, in my opinion. And then the other things to look at are, how many questions are on the survey, what type of questions are going to be asked. Are they multiple choice? Are they, well, I guess most of the time they are multiple choice, but how many open-ended questions are you going to ask? What's the wording like? Does it sort of match the wording that you use on your campus? And whether or not you can use additional questions. So part of the number, going back to that, is like, if it's a huge survey, for example, the National College Health Assessment is a rather large survey. Now, they've done a lot of work to make it simpler to get through the survey, but it is still rather large. Takes somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes to answer the survey, even if you if you don't add extra questions, which I do. And then the topics, again, do you want just to know about the students' substance use, recovery information, or do you really want to be able to match that information with student mental health indicators or academic indicators, et cetera? So does the survey really get to all of the questions that you need to ask in order for the survey to meet your needs? And then what method of surveying are you going to use? Online is great for lots of reasons, but it doesn't get the same response rate typically as a paper survey does, or at least has in the past. Is it going to be random sample? Is it going to be a convenience sample? What kind of support is provided through the surveying organization? Again, assuming that you're going that direction. and what is the cost, and really considering all of the costs associated, including incentives, etc. And then again, as you get ready to administer the survey, what's required on your campus? Will you need the institutional review board, the human subjects committee to give approval for your survey? What kind of technology needs do you have? Are they going to need to whitelist different ISP? I'm not good at tech, but ISP addresses. Are they there for backup? Do you need to send out additional information that you'll need your tech team to do? And then what's your survey sample? How many do you need? And this is something that, as we get into disaggregating data, is really important. Like, it's important to have a big enough survey sample, especially if you're doing random, to be able to generalize the survey results to your student population. But in addition to that, there are many small subpopulations of students that, if you end up with a sample of, say, 500, it's going to be really hard to say anything meaningful about your LGBTQAI2S+ students, for example, or your Native American, Native Alaskan students, or your Pacific Islander students. So you really want to get, if possible, a survey sample that's big enough so that when you get the 8 to 15% response on your online survey, for example, that those smaller populations are big enough for you to be able to make some kind of assessment of what's going on with those particular student populations. And then you have to think through, of course, how many reminders you're going to send and what kinds of incentives you are going to provide, and what kinds of announcements you're going to make to remind people in the environment to take the survey. For example, at ASU, with our National College Health Assessment, one of the things that we do is we post a announcement of the survey just for the random sample, the students who are on the random sample list, in their priority task list on their My ASU portal. And then that group of students also gets what we call banner ads on their My ASU portal, so that they're reminded, not just through the reminder invitations, but also through these other different cues in the environment to take the survey. So really trying to push those numbers up as high as we can get them, so that we end up with a sample size that's usable for some of these data tricks that we want to use, I'll call them. So next on our agenda is how we make sense of the data. And we're going to talk about these three, or I'm going to talk, and you're going to hopefully begin to absorb and learn and think about how you might use some of this information. And so we're going to talk about who will conduct the analysis, some of the tricks for preparing the analysis, and selecting key performance indicators. And then we'll get into some of the really fun data pieces. Now, one of the, I've been talking to people about data for a really long time, really trying to encourage our colleagues to figure out how to really do the work to collect the data that they need in order to be the most effective that they can be on their campuses. And a lot of people push back, or part of the reason that they're struggling is because they don't really have someone on their team that can do a good data analysis. So this slide really presents some ideas about how you might be able to use people outside of your staff to do that, in addition to, of course, yourself. So grad students and interns are readily available. Now they need some mentoring and they need some oversight because they're not experienced. You have faculty in your institution who might be interested in this data, but let me just caution you that they will be interested in it in ways that you aren't. And that's okay, but you just need to work with someone who's also willing to cut and dice the data the way that you need it to be done. Institutional analysis might get involved. And of course, you can use or hire professional staff to be part of your team, which I recommend if it's at all possible, or of course you can either be taught, take some classes, absorb this particular responsibility yourself. Now, I've used all of these methods, and ultimately over the past 4 or 5 years, this has landed in my lap, and I have found that to be, for myself, a very helpful place for it to land. Just some thoughts. One thing that I've learned is when you get the raw data, save a copy, save 2 copies of the original raw data set, because as you start, or whomever is doing the data analysis starts messing with the data, I'll call it, you could lose something. So you don't really want to lose anything. If something looks wrong, you want to be able to go back to an original copy of the data, of the raw data, and be able to check and make sure that, oh, okay, something weird didn't happen. We didn't combine data wrong or something like that. So it's just really helpful to save a copy. It seems pretty obvious, but also, sometimes the most obvious things are the things that we forget to do. And then what I like to do is organize the raw data. For example, we use the NCHA as our survey. Maybe I didn't mention that before, but we've been doing the NCHA since it started in the spring of 2000. And for a few years, we did it every other year. And then we started to do it every year in, I think, 2008. And so we have a lot of raw data, and we have a lot of data that we can use to monitor trends. But that also means that we've got to organize the data from year to year to year in a similar fashion. And it just makes sense to organize it so that it's easier to navigate through the data in your data analysis software and to answer the questions that you're going to answer. Consider weighting the data. Now, weighting the data is a process where you take the raw data that you get back from the survey, from all the respondents, and you look at the demographics and you figure out, like, does this represent our student population or not? And typically, as you probably all know, women tend to we tend to get a higher response rate from women than we do from men. So maybe 80% or 70% of the survey respondents are female, or identify as female, and 30% identify as male, but maybe the percentages are 50-50 on your campus. Well, that's going to give you some really weird data if you're trying to figure out what's going on in general with your student population. So weighting the data is an opportunity to tell the survey software to create changes in the data that account for more men answering, or more male students answering the survey, and fewer females. And it does that randomly so that ultimately you get better data. And you might do that with your race and ethnic groups that are a part of the survey, so that, for example, if you have 60% white Caucasian students and 40% other, then you want to make sure that that's also reflected in your survey population. And at this point in time, ASU is a Hispanic serving institution. And so I look at and weight against with Hispanic students, male, female, and also year in school, freshmen, other undergrads, and grad students, so that ultimately, when I look at the other demographics, they come out about right with the demographics that we know of at ASU. And then I can trust that the data that I'm sharing with the institution is a little closer to accurate to representing what's happening with our student population. Now, there are different ways that you, as you're preparing the data, that you can transform the data, it's called. And I'll just show you a few examples. So a transformation is something where you might, for example, collapse responses. So you can see here that there's a question in the NCHA that shows or that asks how often the student used marijuana, or the last time the student used marijuana. And you can see it asks about, did it happen in the last 2 weeks? Did it happen between 2 weeks and 30 days, 30 days and 3 months, 3 months and 12 months, or more than 12 months ago? Or did they never use marijuana? Okay, now I'm going back to advance the slides, and I did it. Okay, so what I do is I look at 3-month use. So I'm going to collapse 2 weeks and 2 weeks to 30 days and 3 months together into one group. And I'm going to collapse all the other students that used into another group that I'm calling ever. And I'm going to collapse all the students. Well, there was only one group that was never. So now I have a much easier to view slide. I don't have to, it tells the story quicker. People can look at this and they go, oh, wow, 27% of our students used in the last 3 months. Tells the story more readily. This is a similar picture for the last time students used alcohol. So 3-month use rate. Oh, and I should tell you, these are not ASU data. These are national data. I requested national data from the National College Health Assessment a few years back. And so these are from fall 2019 and spring 2020 NCHA 3 survey data. And it's the national data, and there are about 87,000 students in this data set that I'm using right now. If it's not that national data group, I will let you know. There's 1 or 2 slides that aren't. So similarly, we might combine variables. Sorry, this is another collapsing variable. So the students are asked the number of drinks they had last time, and they just write them down. So you end up with a very long list of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. And so you need to collapse that data. And this is the way that I like to collapse it, although I do it a number of different ways. So the students who said that they didn't have anything or that they never drank, the students who said they had 1 drink last time, 2 to 4, and 5 or more. And I also do 10 or more. For example, in another setting, I might need that kind of information, but this is how I do it. And here we go with combining variables. So for example, I'll show you this slide. There are lots of different methods of tobacco use or that are listed in the NCHA. Students can choose that they smoked cigarettes, that they used electronic cigarettes, that they used water pipe or hookah, chewing tobacco, smokeless tobacco, etc. And what I do is in that white bar on the right side of the slide, where I take anyone who said yes to any of those, and I put them into one group that's a used tobacco group in the last 3 months. And now I know that 21% of our students, or of these students nationally, use tobacco at least once of some kind, at least once in the last 3 months. Okay, moving on. So we want to also select key performance indicators. And it's helpful to look at all the data, but it's really helpful to decide what data is going to be the most useful and what you want to monitor from year to year so that you can see what direction your data are headed, using them as, of course, the metrics to make determinations and to follow your goals. So another thing that you want to do is to examine relationships between alcohol and other drug misuse and recovery and other behaviors and experiences. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples, but right here, I'm suggesting that you want to compare use and recovery with academic indicators, mental health, some various health practices, other alcohol and other drug and recovery indicators, and engagement. So let's take a look at some of these slides. So this is a slide that shows, you can see on the right what the different what the different bars indicate. So at the top there is the percentage of students who scored positive for suicidality, who either didn't use or doesn't drink. Okay, so that's an alcohol question. And then you can see that 24% had 1 to 4 drinks the last time they socialized. 29% who were scored positive for suicidality, who had had 5 or more drinks the last time they socialized. 32% of the students who had engaged in heavy drinking of 5 drinks or more in the past 2 weeks scored positive for suicidality. Those students who had used cannabis in the last 2 weeks, 39% were positive for suicidality. And those students in recovery, 54%. This is very useful data, as you can see, as you advocate for more funding, as you advocate for more programs, as you advocate for more staff, by really looking at what everyone is interested in, mental health issues, and cross-examining them with alcohol and other drug and recovery issues. Again, with serious psychological distress, the Kessler-6 is scored on the National College Health Assessment, and you can see a similar pattern where these different, I'll call them elevations in alcohol and marijuana use and in recovery indicate a higher percentage is experiencing serious psychological distress. And now we're looking at the percentage of students who scored positive for loneliness on the UCLA loneliness scale. And you can see a similar pattern. You can see that loneliness isn't as pervasive among our alcohol and even our high or heavy drinkers. But then we start to see that students we see that students in recovery are more lonely than other students in this particular graph. And then looking at grade point average, this is the percentage of students in these same groups or with these same behaviors who had indicated that they had a cumulative grade point average of an A. And you can see that the highest A GPAs came from those students who either don't drink or didn't have any the last time they socialized, who had 1 to 4 drinks. Those were exactly the same, but you start to see those percentages of students with an A GPA coming down as they had 5 or more last time, as they engaged in heavy drinking in the past 2 weeks, as they frequently used marijuana or cannabis, and for those students who are in recovery. So these are really critical ways to examine your data. The next few slides, I'm just going to show you some of the other ways that we've used data. Again, we're really just looking, or we really are looking at that national data that I mentioned previously. So here we go. We could ask a question like this: do 80% of freshmen drink alcohol? Did 80% of freshmen drink alcohol in the past 30 days? Is that true or false? This was actually something that I used in a presentation a few years ago. It's false. At the national level, this particular year, 46% of college freshmen drink alcohol in the past 30 days. And in fact, I like to emphasize that that means 54% of college freshmen did not use alcohol in the past 30 days. And this is a great piece of information, not only for students, because a lot of times, students have that misperception that everyone is partying with alcohol and everyone, uses alcohol at every social event, and they don't. And then to really help your fraternities and sororities think about, and you can divide this data down for them as well, and it still works out that a significant subpopulation of fraternity and sorority members don't use alcohol or didn't the last 30 days. So what are they doing at their social events to help engage those students that aren't using alcohol, that for any reason, whether it's a personal choice or whether it's because they're getting ready to take a test or they're working or whatever it is? It gives an opportunity for us to talk to administrators about what are we doing to build more and more opportunities for students who aren't drinking to have fun and socialize together, and also to really help groups of students who have a reputation for drinking more to think about those in their groups that don't drink as much, and how are they including them. This is another slide. This is actually data from ASU from a few years ago. And what I used this particular slide for is that we had discovered that our students didn't, that they weren't taking seriously their responsibility to do something when someone was passed out from alcohol or from what they thought was alcohol. So what I did was I took some other substances and I said, okay, well, our low or non-drinkers don't really use these other substances much, but some of them do. Our moderate drinkers use it more. And look at our heavy drinkers are really likely to have taken other substances. So if you see someone who's a heavy drinker and you think they're passed out from alcohol because you've seen them drink a lot, don't assume that it's only alcohol, because they think alcohol, someone's just going to survive from that. Many students do anyway. And, so this ramps up the need in their minds. It escalates the danger in their minds for, why they might call 911, get medical assistance for someone who's passed out, who typically drinks a lot. Just going to move on. Want to just pay attention to, I'm going to skip through some slides because I know it's getting later. So here we have a reason to disaggregate data. Now I'm looking specifically at the NCHA survey because that's the survey that I use, but you can do this sort of evaluation with any of the surveys, looking at their old data and their new data regarding demographics. And what you can see is that in this particular example, looking back to 2015 and to 2020, there's really not much of a difference in many of the demographics that are representative of the students taking the survey. The one area that is different is that there are fewer students identifying as heterosexual. And then we look at, in 2020, the fact that these populations of students aren't highly represented in the aggregate data. And we really need to pay attention to all subpopulations of students so that at the end of the day, we're meeting their needs, not just the needs of the students who come out, quote unquote, on top in the survey responses that we get. And I add additional, what I call engagement, or these aren't so much the engagement, but additional, actually, these are on the survey, and I'm just going to skip to the next slide to show you some. Oh, I didn't include it. I had additional things like students who were student employees in the last year, students who are involved in the performing arts, students who are in the marching band, students who are who attend class for a particular in a particular college, students who attend class on a particular campus, students who are online students only, so that we have a lot of opportunities to really, dive down into the data to find out what's happening with particular student population, and to then know, okay, these are the students that are most affected by whatever it is. And we can go right into that student population, but that requires, as you can surely imagine, that requires building partnerships with the people that are working with those students, with the students who are in those subpopulations, and with student government, and also using data to convince our administration that it's worth our time to spend some of our resources, not on universal prevention, but on selected and indicated prevention strategies. So here we are with the different subpopulations who are at high risk for underage drinking. And you can see, just quickly looking at the list, students who live in Greek housing, fraternities and sorority members, students who are in recovery, note, are at high risk for underage drinking, students who live off campus, sports participants, students who identify as white, sexual minorities, and then that last white bar is what the aggregate tells us about the general student population. So you can see how important it is for you to look at these subpopulations, because their risk is greater than you would get from just looking at the aggregate student population. We'll look at this for heavy drinking. Looks pretty similar, a fraternity sorority resident or a member of a fraternity sorority. The group that pops in here that wasn't in the previous list is male students, but we still get students in recovery. And then Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are in this particular group. It's a small n, but it's important to note, and then note that from year to year so that you know if it's really consistent. And then the students who are at higher risk for cannabis use are those in recovery, those who are using temporary housing. And then we see some of the same groups adding in trans, gender non-conforming students, Indigenous American and Alaskan students, disabled students, bi and multiracial students, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, and then you see our aggregate student population. Again, this is that national data. So these are 87,000 students that we've had the opportunity to subdivide with the data to come up with these numbers. Last but not least, and I know we're out of time, I just want to mention how important it is to develop a story around the data. And that story is how you are going to talk to all of the administrators, students, anyone that you need to about what's happening with students, so that you can gain those commitments and partners and use this data most effectively. And then I just want to thank you for your time. And I will hand the slides back to Anthony, if I can. There we go.
Thank you, Dr. Moses, for sharing of yourself and your research. At this time, attendees, if you have specific questions for Dr. Moses, we do ask that you put them in the Q&A. We did have a question come in earlier on, and they ask, are there any specific data analysis programs that allow for this weighing feature to be incorporated? This came in a little bit earlier.
Yeah, actually, I use SPSS, and it is available on SPSS as a plugin. And so you have to get the advanced version of it, I guess. And then I think most of the statistical software have the capacity, but I'm not honestly familiar with other statistical software because I don't personally use it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Moses. I don't see any other questions. I'm going to quickly share your contact slide that you shared in the slides, as well as the session slides that I shared via PDF in the chat. You'll have access to all of this. But thank you again, Dr. Moses, for sharing of yourself and of your work. I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides. Again, just a few reminders of upcoming events that we would hope to see everybody to tune into. Again, we have our Harm Reduction Learning Collaborative launching next week on April 19th, and we'll be starting at 1:30 and goes till 2:30. Additionally, we have a water cooler chat happening on May 9th and is focusing on the AOD prevention and mental health connection, and will be moderated by Dr. Dolores Cimini. Our next free webinar will be focusing on social norms marketing campaigns, and is titled the social norms marketing campaigns, the good, the bad, the ugly, and is taking place on the 17th, and is featuring Dr. Bill DeYoung. You probably saw a promotion mentioning that registration just opened up for that event. And of course, we have the 2023 national meeting taking place at the end of June. That's June 25th through the 28th, and we'll be in person in Columbus, Ohio, but we do have virtual options available. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and just reminding folks that today's session has been recorded, and you'll have access to that via our website within 3 business days. We also have an evaluation that is embedded in today's session that will go out directly as you leave the room. And so if you have the time to provide us with some feedback and future topics, we would greatly appreciate that. Thank you again, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and week.